Good afternoon. I'm Jacqueline Martin and I'm with the Media and Communications Department with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm here with Councillor Larry Sault and he would like to talk to you a little bit about his pillar, and rather than do a submission for the newsletter, he has decided to do a video which Chief and Council had approved to have this done. So I'll take it away, Larry.
Ani, bonjour. Songi Kinu Disney Cosmos, Sagas New Credit Bunjiba. Good afternoon, New Credit. We are talking today. I want to be able to talk about nation rebuilding and governance. Today I'm sitting here as a councillor. Just for the viewing audience that don't know, I am former chief of the Mississaugas of New Credit First Nation, spent 4 years as chief here in the 90s. And I moved on to be Grand Chief of the Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians, working with the Chiefs of Ontario and the Assembly of First Nations for many years, over the past 20, 30 years. Talking about nation rebuilding and nation building, we have to go back to at least my time. And it's my goal to sort of help maybe our membership understand historical context for the Mississaugas of New Credit. I am so honored, I'm absolutely honored to be able to sit as chief here of the community from 1993 to 1997. And I say I'm honored because I sat with those who are not with us anymore. I sat with our dads and our grandpas and in the community, and they had a certain way in the era that they grew up in. They had a certain way of doing business, and here we are, fast forward to 2018. We see a younger generation coming on the scene in our politics, in our political world, in our First Nation communities. And the mindset is not the same. And my goal, hopefully, in terms of educating, if you will, being able to talk about yesteryear, helping us simply to understand the era, at least in my time that I've been here, and it's been since 1985 when I first got involved. My first involvement in politics basically was with the Native Horizons Treatment Center. The Chief and Council in 1985 had asked me to get involved with the with Health Canada discussions, negotiations with 14 First Nations. I was not an elected band member at the time. I was a former recovering alcoholic, and Chief and Council wanted me to bring my experience to the table with what we call now Native Horizons Treatment Center. And it's been really, for me, it's been a good road at times. And at times it's been a frustrating role. But in 1985, I saw an opportunity to be able to deal with policy and legislative changes just in those times of 2 years working with Health Canada. And obviously, fast forward 30 plus years, I'm still dealing with policy and legislation.
So can I interrupt you there, Larry? So you 30 years you've been dealing with the same issue with no fruit?
There has been fruit, but not from the fruit that I expect. I have long said that in order to deal with the real issues of our communities and First Nations across the country, we have to deal with the constitutional matters. We know that in 1982, the Constitution of Canada, that now as it exists, Section 35, was put in the Constitution to deal with our issues as First Nations. However, in order to deal with real meat and potatoes of sort of our everyday lives, we have to deal with Section 9124. In first what they call the British North American Act.
Okay, Larry, for some of the members who don't know what that section is, do you want to just give us a little history of that?
9124 is part of the British North American Act, and you can Google, you that is savvy on the Google side, Google British North American Act, Section 9124, that they brought into the Constitution of Canada. And that section says that deals with Indians and lands reserved for Indians. Right now, the Government of Canada has asserted jurisdiction under that dominion of Indians and lands reserved for Indians. My point is, until we deal with the real issues of the Constitution of Canada, to deal with ourselves and to deal with our lands, that's the argument today after centuries of discussion. So we're still on that path.
And this path you're on, what do you have more to that path that you can move forward on to?
So on modern day conversations of nation rebuilding and governance becomes a question. New Credit, and I gotta go, let me go back to 1969. So if anybody wants to Google the 1969 white paper, when I read the 1969 white paper, it's like I'm looking at this through the lens of politics. I'm looking at this through the lens of control. I'm looking at this through the lens of domination from an external government. So when I look at the history of the 1969 white paper and what they called the Hawthorne Report, the Hawthorne Report was a report that was commissioned by the Liberal Party of Canada in 1964. And when the Hawthorne Report came out and they tabled that to the Liberal government of the day, the Liberal government didn't like the report, so they took it and they reworked the report, now called the 69 White Paper. And if you read the 1969 White Paper, you'd be scratching your head and saying, who wouldn't want this? Who wouldn't want, there's no native in Canada that wouldn't want this. But really, if you don't understand the politics of what they were really talking about, it's called assimilation. It's called everybody's going to be under one banner in this country, and there will be no Indian reserves. That was the issue of the 1969 White Paper. It was about the problem with Indians. It was about this. Indians are the problematic thing in Canada.
And how to get rid of them.
And how to get rid of them. And the only way to get rid of us was through this assimilative process, through policy and legislation, right?
Right.
And so when we talk about our organization, so it dates back to 1969, the chiefs started gathering, and there's a whole history on this from the West Coast. And they had a train, they called it the train to Ottawa. I'm not sure what the real definition, but that was chiefs from all across the nation picked up on getting on the train, going to Ottawa to deal with this 1969 White Paper. In the 1970s, a guy by the name of Harold Cardinal came on the scene. I believe he was well educated, came on the scene and rebutted the 1969 White Paper with what they called the Red Paper. And out of the Red Paper, we were deemed citizens plus. First Nations people in this country were deemed citizens plus. Why? Because we were the first peoples here. We were before Canada was ever formed. We were. Our treaties were international with Great Britain. And if we don't understand that dynamic, that our treaties was not about what Canada was giving to us. Our treaties was about what we were giving to Canada.
Exactly.
And that's what we need to understand. And most people don't really understand, of our people that maybe haven't been schooled in the politics of the day, most people don't understand. So this Red Paper was to counter the White Paper on assimilation. And I'm saying this for a reason, because if we don't understand the foundation of why we're sitting here, we won't understand where we are today. And I will bring us up to date of where we are today. So after the Red Paper, organizations of all across the nation, Indian organizations, I'm saying Indian of the day, now we're called Indigenous, we were called Aboriginal, we were called First Peoples, many names. But at the day they were called Indian organizations. That's when they started forming Indian organizations where every region, British Columbia to Halifax to Prince Edward Island, were all forming their different political territorial organizations, PTOs we call them today, political alignments with one another. And in the 1969-70s era, our grandfathers, our dads, our grandfathers here at New Credit were part and parcel of working together with the Iroquois nations, Akwesasne, Six Nations, Gunasatagi, all these Iroquoian communities were formed and came together with the Ojibwe communities. And for us, we formed what we called the Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians.
Yes.
And that was the Ojibways, the Iroquois were forming to fight this whole issue of assimilation. Okay? So there was action, reaction.
Yeah. So Larry, I just gotta ask you something. From 1969 to present day, has there been any changes and has there been any, I guess, progress towards our goal?
We have taken 2 steps forward and 10 steps back. Every time a government changes, whether it's liberals, and mostly it's just been liberals and progressive conservatives in this country, when progressive conservatives get in, they're anti-First Nation, they're anti-Indian. They don't want to do anything that will put us forward. The Liberals, I don't think we should ever consider that non-native governments want us to have nations. This is about control. This is about domination. Let's be very, very clear. And we've taken 2 steps forward, 10 steps back. But here's the ultimate issue. For us at the Mississaugas of New Credit, or Six Nations, or Oneida, or Bucktown, Moraviantown, wherever you are, it's not about, it's about trying to form ourselves. It's about uniting ourselves. It's about trying to advance our agenda. So we've had to fight. Our whole world is fight. We haven't changed our course in our First Nation communities when it comes to changes of government. Regardless of government changes, Liberals to NDP to PCs, our fight's still been the same. And it is still the same today. So the forming of these Indian organizations back in the 70s and 80s was basically a forming of coming together in united fronts to be able to deal with issues across the country. So we're going to, we have to talk about interactions. So it's not like we've had peace amongst ourselves. Let's be real here. I'm just going to be realistic here. And whether you live off reserve or on reserve, we have issues there. We have dynamics. Ever since I got involved in 1987, I was first elected to this council, sitting with chiefs and councils. I've sat under a number of chiefs. I've been chief myself. I have my own ideas about where we should go, and I beat my chest a lot in terms of my ideas. And I'm not going to stop, because it's my fight for our people and who we are, and really laying that foundation. But until we deal with the real issue, that is Indians and lands reserved for Indians, we have to take that back. Nobody's going to give it to us. Nobody.
Exactly, Larry.
Our leadership has to step up. And you know, just for the information of some of you listeners today, I have quite a range of experience. And it doesn't make me any better than anybody else. I want to be very clear. All I have is different experience. I've seen the world through a different lens. I've traveled to 10 countries around the world. I spent 15 years in the Canadian Arctic. I had my own aircraft flying into small remote communities in our First Nations, all throughout Ontario, right to the Alberta border. I just have a different experience. And I've seen things that most probably haven't seen. I've lived with the Inuit matchbox houses, one-room houses, with the First Nations in northwestern Ontario. I've lived with them. I understand. I've been in the bush with the Crees. I've been out on the land. I've been out with the dog team. So I just have a different experience in terms of the things that I talk about. Is so real to me. It's not something I picked up in a book and read in the book. And I realize the dream. Maybe I got a utopian dream, I'm not sure. But I have this dream about moving way beyond where we are. And that is real governance. That is real nationhood. So in 1996, I was with Elijah Harper. Him and I were pretty close friends, and I was with Elijah in Rotorua, New Zealand. I was speaking in Rotorua, New Zealand with Elijah Harper and a number of other First Nation guys from Canada at an international Indigenous function. Elijah Harper was called back to the House at the time. He was elected MP for his region in Manitoba, and he was called back from Rotorua, New Zealand to Ottawa. He came back because they were tabling the Royal Commission. The Royal Commission, for those of you who may not know, was a result of Brian Mulroney, who was Prime Minister of the day in the 1980s. You'll remember that Oka took place in 1990. Brian Mulroney was part of that Oka protest. He was a government of the day, and that 78-day standoff, Oka was. And there was, our guys were coming from all over North America to support that standoff for 78 days. After the Oka crisis, they called it, Brian Mulroney said, we got to deal with this issue. And they put together the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. That was the largest volume in history to date of our issues that was research-based. It was research-based in 1990, after 1990 Oka. And in 1996, Elijah was called back to the House because they were releasing that in the whole process of the First Nations issues in Canada. And anyways, they commissioned the report, finished the report, tabled the report in Ottawa, and here we are, almost 20 years later, still not really, only now starting to address some of those recommendations. And by the way, there was like hundreds of recommendations. There was 4 huge books that we have on file over here in our offices on the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples.
Okay, Larry, yeah, so that commission's a whole other story. So I think we should end our conversation, and the next discussion, we can discuss that a little bit more.
I'd love to, and one of the things that with respect to the Royal Commission, and fast forwarding today. So the Royal Commission was based on research, okay? All research. However, now in 2017, 2018, we just came through Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The difference in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Royal Commission is the fact that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission visited communities and had a person-to-person, face-to-face contact with our First Nations all across this country. One was research-based, the other one was reality-based. Here's on-the-ground stuff. This is real stuff now, this Truth and Reconciliation. So what did they do? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission married some of the things that was in the Royal Commission from 1996 to bring it into today's context in terms of governance. So in terms of our next conversation, I mean, I hope this is a tidbit. I hope this is a tidbit. This next conversation will be about on MNC governance and what we mean here. And I'm going to end by saying this. I, over the course of these years, this is my 3rd time now, sitting at the table on the governance file. In the 80s, late 80s, we had what we called community-based self-government. I was at the table there discussing that. And Mississaugas of New Credit walked away from the table because it was wasting our time. It was not about the real issues. And then Bob Nalt, Minister of Indian Affairs of the day in 1999, 2003 or 4, whenever he was elected, he put together the First Nation Governance Act. I became the chief spokesperson for the Chiefs of Ontario on the First Nations Governance Act. Here we are now, exploratory discussions on self-government. Next time, tune in. You'll hear this next topic.
Thank you very much, Larry.